Hi, welcome to City Matters. I'm Mitzi Rapkin, Director of Community Relations for the City of Aspen, and here we talk about all things city, and I'm honored today to be joined by Executive Director of APSHA, Mike Kosdrosky. Welcome.
Hi, Missy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So we're going to talk about APSHA, we're going to talk about regional housing studies and current news.
Yes.
So I guess the big news now, we're sitting here in the middle of July, is that APSHA has a new board and a new structure. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, the elected officials decided to streamline APSHA and its governance structure over the last 6 months or so, and decided, and I think wisely so, to revamp the board and to basically empower the board with more decision-making authority, final decision-making authority, versus the previous governance, policy-making structure and system of having a citizen board, a full citizen board, make recommendations, and then having those policy recommendations on housing policy here in Aspen and Pickens County go to both the city and the county and get approval. But if for whatever reason those got called up and there was any disagreement between what the board was recommending and what the elected officials wanted to see, they kind of had to go back and be addressed either individually or holistically, depending on the policy. And it would kind of often fits and starts, and it would start the process over. So this new structure goes from the previous structure was a 7-member citizen board that voted with 1 alternate, so effectively 8 members, to a 5-member voting board with 3 citizen appointees that were just made yesterday by both the city and the county, and in their respective meetings, and which was in the paper on the front page, at least of the Aspen Daily News this morning, and also in the Aspen Times. And then there's going to be 1 voting member from the City Council and from the Board of County Commissioners, along with 1 elected alternate. So it's a 5-member voting board, but it will have 7 members, actually 8 members with, there's a citizen alternate too. So not to confuse everybody at home, there's going to be 4 elected officials, 4 citizens, but of those 8, 5 will vote.
Okay. And how is that, like, what would be an example of a tangible way that might change something?
It just expedite and streamline policymaking. I think some of the frustration with everybody involved with the process and the previous governance structure under the previous intergovernmental agreement between the city and the county, which forms APSHA, or Aspen Pickens County Housing Authority, for those of you who aren't familiar with the acronym APSHA. I think just collectively everybody realized that we're at a real transition point for the program, and it is very important to the community, to the sense of community, to the diversity here, but also to our economic well-being. And so this program provides a lot of workers and to the local economy. And so we really are at a crossroads now, 5 decades into this experiment called affordable workforce housing, to really address some of the issues that weren't seen when they first started the program. And this has been a big experiment, and it's evolved. And we're the oldest, as far as I know, the oldest and certainly the largest resort-based affordable workforce housing program in North America, if not the world. So we have over 3,000 units, and we're at a transition point in the program where we need to ensure the viability and sustainability of the program, not just for the next 10 years, but for the next 100 years.
Yeah. So there's a few other changes that are also coming into APSHA in terms of maybe updating the system and getting more technology savvy and more kind of online. What are some of those upcoming changes?
Well, we just launched, and we're going to kick it off. Really, the implementation is September. An automation project that has been in the works for the better part of 2 to 3 years. The planning, the request for funding, and credit to the elected officials, past and even current, to see the need for truly modernizing and automating APSHA, because we're still a paper-based system. And again, being the largest of its kind, a program of its kind in possibly the world, it is important that we really modernize the operations and make it much more customer friendly so that applicants, owners, renters, landlords, policymakers, or just interested citizens can understand the program better, go online, have a user-friendly site, but be able to get answers to the questions that they may have. Whether it's a demographic question or what's my appreciation rate of my home after 10 years and based on these capital improvements, things like that. So it's really to give the community a real opportunity to really engage with APSHA as an organization. Sure, it will help us administratively, but this is really a customer-focused project, and it's a community-focused project in that it's meant to really improve the effectiveness of this marketplace, this deed-restricted marketplace that we operate in.
But I would think the data would also help you. Like if you have the
Yes.
data online, you might be able to see, like we noticed in the last 5 years, everyone who's bought a Category 3 is 38 years old.
Yes.
Or, you can get that granular with some of this stuff.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's meant to get that granular, hopefully, or big picture, but it's meant to also provide us information and data information in the 21st century, in the age of Google and other things, really real-time information for all users and all spectators, for that matter, and really give us an idea about how well the program is operating for the community. Are we optimizing our inventory, our categories, our bedrooms? Where are the gaps? What households or income levels are we serving? Which ones are we not? Are we truly maximizing the program? And can we make it easier for people in the system already? Never mind the folks who are trying to get into the system, but really make it easier for the people in the system and those trying to get into the system, I should say, to use it and make it more efficient. So increase mobility as life circumstances and household size changes. For example, there's been talk for several years about a trade down program or trade up program. I like to call it a right sizing program. So making sure that the number of people in your household matches the number of folks in the bedroom. Of course, everything progresses and evolves, and so do families. And you may a young family may add more children to the family, or an elderly parent for that matter. But an empty nester family or household might want to just really downsize, and they want to have opportunities. Where in the inventory can they do that? And how can we make it easier for them through information, real-time, valid information to give them those options and those opportunities to make those choices.
Right. And I would say also in the last few years, there's been some changes just to like asset caps and categories, and how has that gone? And can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty straightforward change, although it wasn't easy, but it was relative to some of the other things we've been working on and what still needs to be done with and making updates and reforms to the overall housing program. We did increase across all categories, income categories, the income levels, and also we increased the assets or the wealth that somebody can have based on so that we weren't just limiting certain segments. We made it that easier, but we made it it was more easier in the sense of it was much more up to date. It was up to where it never kept pace with inflation over there. It was very static, and it was left static and in place from 10, 15 years ago, I think 15 years ago, and at the time. So it's almost those were things that were just static and in place. And for a program like ours, it needs to be more dynamic. It's got to kind of evolve each and every year, adjust with inflation, and also what we call area median income. We tied income levels to the measure area median income, and that's basically the midpoint on an income distribution. And that, if you recall from our statistics class is in high school. It's the midpoint, and it's basically separating households into two groups: those above the median, those below the median. So we use that as a basis for determining income qualification and income categories across the spectrum. We serve anywhere from under 60% area median income to 240%. To just give you an idea of what that means in terms of real dollars, the area median income in Pitkin County in 2019 right now for a family or a household of 4 people is $103,000. And so you just extrapolate based on that number.
Right. Interesting. And it's gone well?
It's gone well, yeah, I think so. We've gotten good feedback from that. It has gone well, but again, there are much more substantive. That's an important change that had to be done, and it was done by the previous board of directors, and to their credit, and also to the credit of the elected officials who saw the wisdom in moving the system to an AMI basis, because we were relying on old information. I mean, that was 15, 20 years old at the time of changing it, and that change happened 2 to 3 years ago, and that's really good that brings us, it standardizes us basically, and it also allows us to benchmark ourselves against other housing authorities throughout the country.
Great. So, we just came through an election, and most, or if not all, of the candidates who are running, and even council members who aren't, affordable housing is always a top priority. It's where they want to move the needle. And we have a little bit more data when we're talking about affordable housing, because we just recently completed a valley-wide study. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about this regional housing study,
Sure.
How it got started, and then what are some of the glaring findings.
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that, because we just published, I was on the advisory committee for it's called the Greater Roaring Fork Regional Housing Study. And it was really initiated by, at a grassroots level by citizens within the valley. One, a former planner for the city of Boulder, chief planner, and then also a current attorney in Basalt, but also somebody who used to live in Aspen and served on the board of directors for APSHA. But they were going around to all the communities a couple of years ago asking, hey, we'd like to create a regional housing, multi-jurisdictional housing authority on a regional basis, much like we have for transportation with respect to RAFTA, or for those of you at home, Roaring Fork Transportation Authority. And it was met with mixed results, even here in the Upper Valley. And so some of us, and I was basically given the green light by the city and county administrators to work with these folks to say, hey, here's maybe a way to approach it. I don't think it's an idea that's ready or ripe right now. However, maybe in the future. And really, the purpose of this study was let's identify what are the issues. Let's really, before we throw solutions at anything, let's really identify what are the issues, what are the problems, what are the pain points. We all know it anecdotally, but do we have the real information and data to support the extent of the issue, the housing crisis, as a lot of people call it, or are we just grasping at straws? And so it was very important for this committee and all the jurisdictions throughout the valley, the Roaring Fork Valley, and spread into the Colorado River Valley to participate. And they came, this grassroots committee came to my board of directors a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, a little longer than that maybe, and asked for some funding. And the APSHA board committed non-tax dollars, $25,000 in non-tax dollars towards this overall study, which I think it was about $150,000, but it was the first of its kind, and it was a wide scope using primary and secondary information or data. And so some of the findings or conclusions is that, at least, and before I get into those findings and conclusions, it looked at the whole region, again, the Roaring Fork Valley, all the way from basically Eagle Gypsum to Newcastle and Parachute, and all the way up to Aspen. And it then also broke down that wide geography, that regional geography, into subregions, including Aspen Snowmass. So one thing we learned is that Aspen Snowmass, specifically the subregion, has a 4,000 unit shortfall for households under 160% AMI, or area median income, which I was talking about a little earlier. And just to translate that into dollars, that's a household making $165,000 or less. And by 2027, that shortfall or that housing deficit is projected to be 5,200 units. Now, are we going to be able to build our way out of this problem? No, and I don't think that's the sole answer. And there's no silver bullet. I think there's a variety of options on the table, and I think that's going to be important that we address it holistically, and we have different arrows in our quiver to kind of work at making sure we provide affordable workforce housing across the spectrum of incomes that we serve in this community. We know that regionally there's over 14,000 households that are housing cost burden. And what does that mean? Well, when you try to get a loan from your bank, they often, the general measure, and it's not perfect, but it's the general rule of thumb is that if you're spending more than 35% of your gross income, in the case of this study, they just looked at 30% of your gross income on housing costs, then you're considered cost burden. And we have over 14,000 households within the entire region that are housing cost burden. So what does that mean? Not only does it impact those individual families and households financially and make it very difficult for them to live here and afford to live here on a number of levels, whether healthcare, childcare, food, transportation, et cetera. But it costs the community, the region, $54 million a year in lost economic stimulus. And I think that that's a problem because that's lost tax revenue, that's lost business for a lot of local businesses. And so I think it's something we need to address. And another thing we found and confirmed, we all know this anecdotally, is that the average Aspen Snowmass worker works 1.4 jobs. And so, and we also know that wages, and the study confirmed it, that wages are disproportionately low compared to the cost of living here. And we all know that the cost of living is driven primarily by the cost of housing.
Yeah, that's a lot of information. I think
it is.
Another thing that it found, wasn't there something with sort of cross commuting and finding that a lot of people
Yes.
who live in Aspen might actually commute to Basalt and vice versa, and that there's more people on the roads maybe than we think.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's, and I know from my notes here, over 60% of the regional workforce cross commutes. So they pass each other on the road, mostly on Route 82, and then of course on I-70. But more than 26,000 workers cross paths on the road each day, and I think we have 47,000. Don't quote me, but I think it's 47,000 total workers in the region on a daily basis. All the commute, not just throughout the valley and beyond. That's important because it does affect quality of life. There's a financial impact, and of course we know, particularly up here in the Upper Valley, the costlier it gets. We keep pushing more and more of our daily workforce out of Aspen and Snowmass and down valley into Basalt, Carbondale, Glenwood Springs, and beyond. And so that does increase congestion. And in fact, we know that in the Aspen Snowmass area, 64% of the total jobs are filled up here by in-commuters. So basically, we import most of our workforce, almost 2/3 of our workforce. About 36%, according to the study, of total jobs are filled by local residents and workers. And as you know, the Aspen Area Community Plan, many years ago, it hasn't been in place for the last 10 or so years, maybe 20, but at one point in time, the Aspen Area Community Plan set as a community goal, to house at least 60% of the local workforce. Well, by that measure, which no longer exists, by the way, just so we're very clear, we're far below that, even with this amazing housing program that we have here. So it comes back to a question of, are we optimizing, are we utilizing or maximizing, for that matter, the existing inventory and serving the community the way the program was intended.
Yeah, and more people, maybe surprisingly so, are actually leaving Aspen to go to work, which may be...
Yes, yeah, there are numbers about that. I mean, I don't have them readily available to my, but we do export a fair amount of workers, and I hesitate to give you an exact number, but you can find this study online through apcha.org or apsha.org. And our website, we have it published, and it's the Greater Roaring Fork Regional Housing Study. It's a 165-page study. So if you're a data geek, you'll love it. But there is an executive summary, and then you can look at the issues addressed based on looking at it regionally, but also look at the issues as it pertains specifically to Aspen snowmass.
And so in this, there's interesting data like Aspen snowmass, existing home sale prices is, average 2.4 million in the Valley region, 690, which is, a lot. It's not like you can just move to Carbondale and buy a home.
That's right.
Once this study was done, I know the people who authored it went around and gave some presentations. How was that received, and what's kind of next?
That's a great question, and I think it was received well, though, and we had good attendance, certainly up here in Aspen and Snowmass, but there was another meeting held Mid-Valley and then Down Valley in Glenwood Springs. So I think it was in that reverse order: Glenwood Springs, then Mid-Valley, then Up Valley. We were the third and final that we had built into the contract with the experts and the professionals who put together the study. And there was a lot of data they presented. So all the good things, but I think what we're trying to do now is to move it beyond and kind of boil it down even further. Kind of let's get to the brass tacks. Let's get to the essence of what the findings are, the conclusions are, and address this in layman's terms so that we don't confuse the public, because there's a lot of information, a lot of data that can get really confusing. And if you'd like to get into the weeds, you can do that. But what I'm trying to do, and I just did this morning with the Rotary Club of Snowmass Village and with also the Rotary Club of Aspen a few weeks back, is to present the findings in a very succinct way and to boil it down and get to the essence of what this study said. And you're right, it looks at affordability, and you look at the average existing home sales price in Aspen, and this is based on data from the third quarter of 2018, it was 2.4 million for the average price. And in the Roaring Fork region, the average price is just under 700,000. And within the United States, it's under 400,000. So it shows you can do the math, the disparity, the gap or the delta between what housing is here versus the Valley and then versus the rest of America.
So one of the things, going into this that you were talking about was this kind of interest in a housing authority that's regional. And the kind of word back was like, do the study first, see where we're at. Where do you think we are with that?
I think this is more, at this point, we're still a ways off. I think it's important to have the conversations like this, like we're having today, and engage the community at every opportunity and every turn. This is really, as I explained to my audience this morning in presenting these findings, is that I'm not here to give solutions. That's for the policymakers. We will make recommendations, but this is really setting the table for, all right, what are the issues? What have we identified? What do we need to work on? And let's build some consensus on what the problems are and get some agreement around that before we go ahead and jump to conclusions or jump to solutions. I think that's something we don't want to do, particularly at a regional level. I think this is going to take time, if it's going to happen at all. But I think this conversation, just having the conversation locally, but also empowering all the other people like me and elected officials throughout the region to have this conversation with their respective communities is only a good thing.
Yeah, and it seems like, at least in Aspen, our next move here is we are starting outreach for building at the lumberyard, building Burlingame. So there are more units coming online, but the solution has to be probably a big menu of options.
That's correct, and I think it's great what the city and the county are doing and moving forward with, and particularly the city moving forward with additional development. And it's overdue, and it's a positive step forward, but that alone is not going to solve the overall gap or deficit we find across all the income levels.
Yeah, and also, finding out where people want to live and work. Some people want to work in Aspen desperately, and they don't want to live here, and some people want to live here and not work here. And, it's a combination. So making the solution fit the problems, too.
That's correct. You're right. And not everybody wants to or has to live in Aspen. And with the inventory we have and whatever is going to come online in the next 5 to 10 years, there are real opportunities for really making a dent in it. But then there are some real problems too. I mean, that we're facing, because we look at, for example, the expiration of over 500 deed restrictions in the next probably 20 to 30 years, we project.
Yeah. A lot to think about. So again, if people want to see the study, they can go to apsha.org.
Yep.
They can email you. Your email's on there, I assume.
It is, and it's Mike.Kosdrosky, K-O-S as in Sam, D as in David, R-O-S-K-Y, at cityofaspen.com. I'm more than willing to have a conversation with anybody because I think we need to hear firsthand, and we get a lot of great ideas, policy ideas from the community itself.
Great. And all those APSHA board meetings are also listed online, and those are open to the public. So thank you so much for coming.
Mitzi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching.